through the air, chilling the family to their bones. The wind howled like a wild beast, and the air grew heavy with fear. "What is happening?" Lanre's mother whispered, clutching her wrapper tightly around her shoulders. Then the next blow struck. Lanre's father, strong and proud like an old Iroko tree, suddenly fell ill. His body stiffened, and he could no longer move. "It's a stroke," someone whispered. "Let's go to the prophet," Lanre's mother cried, her voice shaking. They arrived at the prophet's church, where the air was thick with incense and solemnity. The prophet's face was grim as he spoke in a low, steady voice. "Someone has taken what does not belong to them. Until it is returned, this family will know no peace." The family stared at one another, confused, afraid and terrified. Lanre sat frozen, his heart pounding like a drum. Who took it?" the prophet demanded, his eyes scanning each member of the family. "I didn't take anything," Lanre lied, his voice barely a whisper. The prophet narrowed his eyes, but said nothing more. He left the family with a warning. If what was stolen is not returned, this is only the beginning. As the family mourned and worried over their father, Lanre slipped away to his room. He unwrapped the crown and stared at its golden surface. "It's just a crown," he muttered to himself, his voice trembling. "Tomorrow I'll sell it and use the money to fix everything. It'll all be fine." But deep down, he knew the truth. The golden crown was no ordinary treasure, and his greed had unleashed a storm he could no longer control. The next morning, his heart was heavy, but his greed remained stronger. He wrapped the golden crown in a black cloth and stuffed it into his bag. "Today I'll sell it," he whispered to himself, his voice shaky. As he stepped out of the house, his family still mourning, he made his way to the market. But he marched on. The bag on his back felt heavier with each step, as though the crown was fighting to stay in the village. Then it began. From the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow dart across the road. He froze and turned, but there was nothing there. His steps quickened, but the shadows followed. "Lanre!" a voice called. He stopped dead in his tracks. It was faint, but familiar. Turning slowly, he saw a figure in the distance. It was Toby, his little brother. But Toby's eyes were hollow, his face pale. "Return the crown, brother," the ghostly figure whispered, his voice carrying on the wind. Lanre stumbled back, his heart pounding like a drum. He turned and ran, but more ghosts of Toby appeared, their faces twisted in sorrow. Some he recognized, others were strangers. "Return the crown, brother," the ghostly figure whispered, his voice carrying on the wind. At the market, Lanre thought he was safe. But suddenly, out of nowhere, masquerades burst into sight. Their tall, colorful figures loomed over him, their whips cracking through the air. "Thief!" they shouted. "Return what you stole!" The first whip struck his back, and Lanre screamed. Another lash, and he fell to his knees. He begged, but the masquerades showed no mercy. "Please," he cried, "I'll return it." To the townspeople, Lanre appeared to be thrashing on the ground, shouting at invisible enemies. "Is he mad?" someone whispered. "I stole the king's crown," Lanre shouted, tears streaming down his face. "I stole it." The market crowd gasped, their whispers turning into shouts. "He stole from the village king," one vendor exclaimed. The masquerades continued their unseen assault, cracking their whips relentlessly. Lanre, bruised and trembling, staggered to his feet, and began a desperate journey to the prophet's house, his cries piercing the air. Inside the prophet's dimly lit chamber, the room smelled of incense and herbs. Lanre burst in, collapsing to the floor. "Help me!" he cried, clutching his bag tightly. "The masquerades won't stop flogging me." The prophet, calm and stern, watched Lanre with sharp eyes. "What did you do, boy?" he asked. Lanre's voice was barely audible. "I took the king's crown. It's here in my bag." The prophet shook his head, his voice low and grave. "Do you know what you have done? That crown is tied to the spirits of the village. You've brought a curse upon yourself and your family." Lanre fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he begged. "I'll return it. Just make them stop." The prophet began a ritual, chanting incantations and sprinkling holy water over Lanre. For a brief moment, the air grew still, and the masquerades disappeared. "You have 3 days," the prophet warned, his tone grave. "Return the crown to the king, or the curse will consume you and your family. This is your only chance." As Lanre stepped outside, the masquerades reappeared instantly, cracking their whips. He screamed in pain and staggered toward the road. No driver would stop for him. The villagers whispered that he was cursed and mad. With no other choice, Lanre began walking back to the village, each step more torturous than the last. The masquerades followed, their chants echoing in his ears, "Return the crown." For 2 agonizing days, Lanre trudged along the dusty path, his body weak, his back raw from the lashes of the invisible masquerades. The golden crown seemed to grow heavier with every step, as though it resisted being returned. Finally, Lanre stumbled into the village, his clothes torn, his face streaked with sweat and tears. The villagers were waiting for him, gathered at the palace gates. The king stood among his elders and guards, his expression calm but severe. The golden crown had called its thief home. Lanre fell to his knees before the king, unwrapping the crown and placing it at his feet. "Forgive me, your majesty," he sobbed. "I was blinded by greed. I thought I could escape, but I've paid dearly for my foolishness." The king's gaze bore into Lanre, his voice steady but stern. "You have brought great sorrow upon yourself and your family. The spirits do not forgive easily. You have returned the crown, but the price you've paid is heavy." Lanre's heart sank as he remembered his youngest brother, Toby, and his ailing father. Tears streamed down his face as he bowed his head in shame. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some were angry, others pitied Lanre, but the king raised his hand, silencing them. "He has returned what belongs to us," the king declared. "His greed has already punished him more than we ever could." Just as Lanre prepared to leave the village, a messenger arrived, panting and wide-eyed. "Your father has passed," the man said. "He died this morning." Lanre's knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground. Grief consumed him like a storm, crashing over him with no mercy. The villagers lowered their heads, even they moved by the weight of his loss. With a heavy heart, Lanre left the palace, each step away from the village feeling like another stone added to the burden he carried. He thought of Toby's laughter, now silenced forever, and his father's proud face, now gone because of his greed. "I cannot go home," Lanre whispered to himself. "What home is there for me now?" Lanre wandered aimlessly, until he reached a large river near the village. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. He stood at the edge, staring at the rippling surface, memories flooding his mind, the joy he had stolen from his family, the lives lost in the bus crash, and the fear he had caused in the village. The crown, now back in its rightful place, had taken everything from him. "I have nothing left," Lanre murmured. Without hesitation, he stepped into the water. The river embraced him, pulling him deeper and deeper until he disappeared beneath its surface. The ripples faded, and the water returned to its calm, quiet state. When the villagers learned of Lanre's fate, they shook their heads in sorrow. His story spread far and wide, whispered by old women to their grandchildren, told by fathers to their sons. "Let this be a lesson," they said. "Greed is a fire that consumes everything. It spares no one, not the thief, not their family, not their future." And so the tale of Lanre and the stolen crown lived on, a warning to all who dared defy the traditions and spirits of the land. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like this video, share it with your family and friends, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.